In today's video, we're going to be talking about 10 lessons I have learnt by being in research for 10 years. Partly why I have grey hair, but there has been some benefits over these 10 years, and I'm hoping to share some really insightful lessons I've learned at different phases of my research journey, from being a undergrad to being a postdoc. So without further ado, let's start with lesson number one. Now, lesson number one is all about it takes longer than you think. Now, believe it or not, if you were to strip away a lot of the BS that I've talked about in academia, unfortunately, if you strip away the delays, a lot of the unnecessary kind of conversations and prep that you have to do and meetings you have to go through just in order for you to do your research or get the stuff that you need, and this is in particular for those who are doing laboratory work, so a lot of the kind of quantitative forms of research. And if you look at a PhD and you strip away all of those things, it actually doesn't take as long to gather the data that actually goes into your thesis. You'll probably say around about 6 to 8 months. I calculated this one looking back at my PhD, and it takes 3 to 4 years because of all the preparations, all the learning and the techniques you have to learn, all of the unfortunate experiments that don't go right, a lot of the delays you have to do, a lot of the meetings you have to go through, and all of those kind of logistical and bureaucratic parts of research. That's why sometimes it takes 3 to 4 years to finish a PhD. So some lessons I've learned, and when I did postdocs, and even when I did my first undergraduate research project that then later became an expanded version of what my PhD was, it took a lot longer than you think. Even though you have the greatest plan, the greatest time frames and Gantt charts and all of these things, it still takes longer than you think. And I'm pretty sure most professors would actually advocate you put in extra 15 or 20% into your time frame to allow for that runoff. That unfortunately happened. So what's lesson number two? Now, lesson number two is all about the notion that when you start a research project, it is vastly different to how it ends. I would say 99% of the time, what you put into your PhD proposal, your master's proposal, your postdoc, your grant, the end point of that project is vastly different to what you started out with. And in hindsight, it should be. So something I learned from the first postdoc I had, and the prof there, Dr. Yassine Amrani, you can find out his details here. Great researcher, great prof at the time. He told me something that has stuck with me for years, and it's the notion of let the data guide you. Now, we should not be biased as researchers. If we want the research to look at that way, that's not great, and that's not ethically a good way to do research. You should conduct an experiment, have hypotheses about we think it's going to go this way or that way. And if we've done the experiment right, whatever the data shows, that should guide us. We shouldn't have a bias towards something because we want it to show this. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of profs, because they want a certain experiment to show something, and if a PhD student has something that shows the opposite, they kind of smother it or dispute it, even though probably the experiment is great and it's that, oh, actually the data shows this or it disproves that. So unfortunately, even though it is vastly different to when you started, sometimes we have that bias that we want it to go a certain way. But unfortunately, if we let the data guide us, and it's part of this lesson number two, then hopefully we have a better understanding. Actually, that's what happened, and we have to understand, okay, let's do a further experiment or another experiment and figure out why. So believe me, and have that in mind if you're starting a PhD now or masters, understand and expect that it will be very different to what you started, and that's okay. That's part of research, and it should be. But as a reminder, let the data guide you. Whatever data you're gathering, whether it's participant information, whether it's interviews, whether it's experiments in lab, whether it's cells, animal models, whatever it might be, if you conducted the experiment right, you got your right controls, again, irrespective of the type of research you do, let the data guide you. Lesson number three, unfortunately, is about money and unfair advantages that are related to research. Now, if you ask anybody, any prof, any active PI, funding dictates a lot of what you do. You can't really do really good research if you don't have the funding to support that. That's why, unfortunately, a lot of academia is cutthroat because of that. People are competing with each other, people are competing with people within the same research group to apply for grants to fund the research. And if you are at research-intensive universities, you know that unfortunately if you don't keep getting grants, you are left behind on the wayside, and you unfortunately may have to transfer to just doing teaching only because you can't keep supporting your research. And the university itself doesn't really support you. You have to go out and get external grants every year, every 3 years. So it can be quite daunting and stressful that the research you want to do, you might have the best idea, you might have a groundbreaking Nobel Prize winning thought process and proposal, but if you can't get funding, it doesn't happen. And it's a real shame because a lot of research, a lot of great researchers and research groups die out because they can't keep funding the research, because they can't compete with each other, or their research didn't go as well as it did to allow you to have, oh, this is really interesting, this is amazing, let's go and fund this. And that's what unfortunately a lot of research councils look at, is how novel it is, how groundbreaking it is, how impactful that research is. And if the experiments don't show that, then unfortunately you might not be in the running to get that grant that maybe somebody else has. So that's why it can get really, really ruthless, really cutthroat. And unfair advantages related to this lesson is that a lot of people, wherever you do your PhD, and it's part of another lesson into this video, wherever you do your research can ultimately dictate how well it goes. Now, it sounds quite obvious. If you're at research institutes and research universities, you are more likely to get research out, you're more likely to get grant funding, because a lot of the grant process look at where you do your research. So you might have a half-hearted research idea based on a few things, and another university that maybe not research intensive has a great research, a groundbreaking genius, but because that person is at a university that grant council doesn't really look at, they may not get funding, even though their research is better, even though if they were to get the same amount of funding, that research group and that person would produce more and be more impactful. And unfortunately, that's where the unfair advantages come into. Even though you may be an incredible PhD student, somebody else might get that conference award because they're at a better university, and that conference looks at, oh, that university will be amazing if we get people from there, and be great from a status point of view and from an image point of view. And some unfortunately grant councils look at that university is more likely to get stuff back from us, let's go look at that research project, even though the research project may not be as sound as somebody else's. This unfortunately happens. Lesson number 4 is all about this two-part process. Doing the research is actually sort of easier. Analyzing it and coming up with ideas becomes the harder part. So I look back at my PhD and postdocs and consulting with other colleagues that I know. Doing the actual lab work isn't that difficult, because you've either trained yourself to do it, you've got colleagues to help you do it, and getting the data out in a sound manner is actually okay. It can be challenging at times, but it can be okay. Sitting down and analysing the data to see what trends and patterns you find, why did it happen, how did it happen, the famous why and how that I talk about on this channel a lot, and Instagram page, by the way, if you don't follow, Aamir.phd, I share some more research advice on there. If you don't have that why and how, then it's going to be difficult to progress the research. So a lot of thinking, a lot of time goes into analysing the data properly. Remember, you can analyse data so many different ways to show what you wanted to show, or to show a different thing that you'll want to focus on. But then analysing it and then going one step further and then producing new experiments and new ideas and having suggestions or inferences as to how does that work becomes a large part of research, and doing the lab work is only a small percentage. So bear that in mind, and this is something I learned, especially in my last postdoc, that doing the lab work can be challenging, but then sitting down and analysing how does it make sense can be really difficult, and that's why you see a lot of coffee being drank and a lot of meetings and hours long to discuss what does this actually mean and how can we step it further, how can we go one step further. Unfortunately, that's the way research is. So lesson number 5 is slightly controversial, but it's actually really important, and I will stand by it, and that is the notion of whatever research field you're in, that dictates the experience that you have with research. And what I mean by this is that you see me badger on, unfortunately, about biomedical science, so molecular biology, immunology, pharmacology, all the areas that I've been in haven't been great in terms of my experience. There's a lot of toxicity, there's been a lot of harassment, blackmail, a lot of cutthroat business, a lot of ruthlessness to a way manageable extent. However, other researchers in different fields like sports science, for example, where I have many colleagues, they haven't seen it to this extent even at all. It is a lot more collaborative in that field. Even though it's kind of a newer science compared to biomedical science, there isn't that toxicity, there isn't that stabbing each other in the back. It is a lot more together, there's a lot more teamwork, there's a lot more needing each other. So as a result, there isn't that, I'm going to hog my epidurals, or I'm going to keep my pipettes here. There's a lot more communal, in a good way, in a positive way. There is a part that they need each other for participants, but when I look at other people, they haven't heard of some of the toxicities I went through. Now, that's not to say academia isn't toxic in some areas. I do believe that there is a lot of problems across the board. Now, I do believe, however, that there is lesser problems in different fields compared to others. So in the organic chemistry field, perhaps, trying to get patents for drugs that you've made and being very, hidden with your research, understandably, is fair game. But if you look at biomedical science and the areas that I was in, it is unfortunately a lot more stabbing in the back. Don't want to show anything, don't want to share anything. They're trying to, grab each other's back to get grants and get papers. So it's a shame, and I do feel that if you are thinking of doing research, be careful that the fields you go into. Within the research group might be amazing, but I've seen that different research fields have different experiences. Some good, some okay, some unfortunately unbearable. Now, lesson number 6 is even more controversial than lesson number 5, but again, I will stand by this, and it's that Where you do your PhD takes 90% of your research trajectory and your journey, irrespective of how good you are as a researcher and how good your PhD was. Now, put into context to help you understand. If you do a PhD at a non-research intensive university, and even if you are fully funded, and I wasn't, but leave that to the side, if you're fully funded, which you're supposed to be as a PhD student at the bare minimum, but you do it at a research intensive university, your access to grants is a lot more limited. Your access to publish in higher ranked journals is slightly limited. Your access to funding perhaps might be limited compared to somebody else who's doing a similar PhD at a research intensive university. Access to grants for conferences, for sabbatical, for secondments, for RA posts are a lot more stringent and limited compared to research intensive universities. So if you compare that to somebody who is at a research intensive university, there's a lot more chance that they'll be able to publish more within their PhD. If you publish more in your PhD, you're more likely to get a postdoc if that's what you're into, whether it's industry, whether it's academia, whether it's any form of postdoc generally, even though it doesn't have to be academia. You're more likely to progress. And I've seen this across the board, that a lot of people who have been in research intensive universities, they may not have as pleasant an experience perhaps, but they're able to churn out more papers because it's centered around it. They have more funding, they have more resources and infrastructure, they have lab managers to help them sort out the lab, whereas non-research intensive universities may not have those. So you have to be a PhD student or a research assistant, a lab manager, a troubleshooter, all at the same time. And other people have cells, in the world of cell culture, cells grown for them, and they just have to do the experiment. So all of these little things compared to non-research intensive universities and compared to research intensive universities makes a big difference as to how you progress. And then I do believe that if you're at a research intensive university, you're more likely to get ahead in any way you want to do, in any form or any career. But if you're not at a research intensive university, me and many others that I know, you're already against the 8 ball. You're already kind of swimming, upstream against the tide. And it's unfortunate because some great researchers aren't able to progress because they don't have those papers that they probably would have got if they had a better, more research intensive lab or university that has the infrastructure to support it. So really be careful if you haven't started your PhD and you want to. Be very wary of where you do it, because that can really impact or either skyrocket your journey or really impede and hinder your journey if you want to progress in research. Now, lesson 7 is something I've come to realize, especially at most of last year, is academia is not as glamorous as people think. Now, I was actually watching a podcast from Ali Abdaal, somebody who I follow a lot and enjoy his content, and he was doing a podcast with a professor, I believe, in behavioral economics. I think I'm just remembering from memory. And something that she said was really profound, and she said that a lot of people strive for certain jobs because of the status of what they think it will entail. So for me, for example, I want to be a professor of immunology. This is a dream of mine, but that was like a really staunch focus of mine. But then I realized, okay, I want to be it because be a professor is really good. But then she made a good point that you want to rather focus on what are the daily, day-to-day tasks that role in that position has. Now, when I've seen professors and those who are, really good PIs, a lot of them don't have a great work-life balance, don't have a great life balance. A lot of them don't have time to spend with their families. Some don't have families because they just focus really on their careers. They're working from Monday to Sunday. I'm like, I do love research, but I don't want to compromise my health, my physical health or mental health. And then it made me realize that a lot of people who I know, both in research intensive universities and non-research intensive unis, have left their posts as academics, as lecturers. And I'm like, they've admitted that it's a prestigious thing to be able to say that you've been a lecturer or senior lecturer at a post. But a lot of them find that it's repetitive with teaching. A lot of them find that, unfortunately, I can't strive, especially at non-research intensive unis. And those who are at research intensive unis, it's difficult that you're under pressure constantly. Try to get funding, try to support the team, try and source really good students, try to get data out in deadlines. And as much as I would love to be in that position to experience it and to progress in areas of nutrition and exercise, which is what I'm very passionate about, and immunology that covers both of them, do I really want to compromise my health to that extent? Especially when I'm already at a deficit with doing a PhD at non-intensive uni, not having enough papers that are out of my control as well. So it made me realize that academia isn't as amazing, as prestigious as it can be. It is an incredible achievement to do a PhD, and I would always advocate somebody to do one. It changed my life for the better. It made me a better person. But academia isn't as easy or as amazing as a lot of people perhaps make it out to be, or you might see on the media, or you might see if you're undergrad and you're looking at, profs and stuff like that. Behind the scenes, it can be very cutthroat, very repetitive, and probably not as flexible as you might think. And just to add on this lesson, a lot of colleagues who say that research is flexible, academia is flexible, it is. It's not generally a 9 to 5. But sometimes you are overworked to the point where you're working Monday to Sunday, you're working on the weekends, you're working in the evening. Now, I was guilty of thinking, academia is flexible. It is, but sometimes 80% of the time I feel you are overworked, whether it's teaching and research for those who have to do both. And then the amount of hours you put in doesn't actually compute to you being flexible. So something to bear in mind. I'm not saying not to go in academia. There are many research groups that are amazing, but be wary is what I'm trying to get at. Lesson number 8 is the notion that research has been pivotal for me in my personal growth. And a lot of those who perhaps do a PhD and don't stay in academia or research as a whole still attribute that a lot of how they see life and a lot of how they've been is as a result of the patience, perseverance, learning and growth they had to do in their PhD. So what I mean by this is that a PhD was a life-changing experience for me. It helped me to improve my mindset, the way I work, the way I view life, the way I work with others, the way I prioritize tasks and manage all the projects that I've got going on. It was a great, building process, great learning process to me be a more enhanced individual in terms of patience, perseverance, hardworking, work ethic, time management, energy management, focus. All of these things were drilled hard in my PhD, and I became a better person, a better individual as a result. So even though you move the research to the side, move the papers to the side, you come out a better person if you do a PhD in the right way. So I would always advocate that if you want to do a PhD, do it for all the reasons that you may have, but don't think that it's going to ruin you, because a lot of times it can improve you as a person under the right conditions, of course. Now, lesson number 9 may sound a bit left field, but I've realised over the 10 years this is something that I didn't appreciate enough, and I really wish I had paid more attention to, and I hope I can do, especially in this year. And that's the notion of stats or statistics is one of the biggest advantages you can have if you know how to do it well. Now, irrespective of what type of research you do, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, whatever it might be, understanding stats is a crucial skill to learn. And if you know it well, or if you get taught it well early and you remember, it will really help you in your research in the long run. Something that hindered me and I know many others is not having the right stats test to analyze your data, and then you get skewed and you get all sorts of wrong variables and data results as a result, because you didn't actually look at the results in the right way by using the stats in the right way. So believe me, even if you're working with qualitative data and you've got participant perceptions, or you've got quantitative zeros and ones from your actual data from the lab, understanding the right stats to use will help you to really understand what's going on in the experiment, and then you can have a better bet of actually inferring what's happening. You have a much better research story. So across the board, understanding stats in your particular area, something that should hold more importance in your learning process, in your day-to-day life as being a researcher. So I would schedule time within a week if you're not as comfortable as maybe other people around you are, especially as I am. Stats is not my strong point. It's something I really need to understand more, even as a postdoc. So if you're undergrad, master's, PhD student, or postdoc, taking time to really understand stats at an advanced level will help you in the long run, irrespective of what you do with research. Something I really undervalued and I regret, unfortunately. Now, lesson number 10 is research, even across the 10 years that I've done it, has made me appreciate life more. Something I talk about a lot is that everything you see around you is a form of iteration, is a form of research. The top that I'm wearing, the camera that I'm using, the light box that I'm using, the food that I ate, the car that I was in, the contact lenses that I'm wearing, the audio recorder, everything came from some form of iteration, some form of research. So when you do more research, you start to think, wow, how did that do that? Or how did that cell behave that way? Or how did that person have this perception or this majority? Or even if you're in the tech world, how do you advance from certain materials? Or AI, which is a big craze at the moment, came from forms of research. ChatGPT, in the previous video that talks about, came from forms of iteration, forms of research. Everything that you see around you, even if the phone that you're watching this video on, or the computer, there were previous versions of this, and there were iterations and research to make it better, faster, lighter, more powerful, more capable. So any form of research that you do, especially now, it's been 10 years since I did my undergrad research project to where I am now, which is crazy to think about. There are so many elements that I realized that, wow, I look at life differently, or I appreciate life more, especially how our body works, right? You know, there's so many things going on, a gazillion processes happening whilst I'm just making this video that I'm not even in control of, and things that I'm in control that just happen naturally, right? Me looking, ears, everything in my hands, you know, training at the gym, playing tennis. It's remarkable what the body is capable of, and in connection to it, how society works, you know, policies and how governments work or how businesses are run. Our research related to that, you know, the most effective way to do X, Y, and Z, all came from a form of research. So it really does, even though it's been 10 years since I started, it makes me realize that research is a pivotal part of society and life, and it really does help you to appreciate life more, helps you become more grateful, which is always a bonus in any form of work that you do. So guys, those were 10 lessons I've learned from being in research for 10 years, which is crazy to think that time has gone by so fast. I do hope you found those lessons valuable. Do comment down below which one you found the most interesting, or the most controversial, or the most impactful to yourself and your life. I will be making more of these type of videos, so do like, comment and subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more content. I would like to see more content. I hope you would too. But enjoy the rest of your day, and I shall hopefully see you in the next one. Take care.